Good morning. Today we begin looking at the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And Daniel is really the only apocalyptic end times book that is in the Old Testament, our Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. But before it gets to that apocalyptic part, there are 6 stories that the writer tells, and we have 4 dream visions. And the book begins, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came and besieged it. So we're in the same time frame that, Ezekiel was here, and Nebuchadnezzar came and defeated Jerusalem. Verse 2 says, the Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into King Nebuchadnezzar's power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. And so it's within this, so it's kind of in the same timeline as Ezekiel was, which doesn't always happen as we read through the Old Testament. But one of the things that happens is that King Nebuchadnezzar then takes and he says, choose some of from the ruling people, some of the young men of the Israelite nation, and train them for 3 years in the traditions and everything of the royal court, so that they may be servants in the royal court. And they are, it says, find young men without physical defect, handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. And what does being young and handsome have anything to do with being competent to serve in the king's palace? I don't know, but they always, this was the way it was, and that's still today, is that people want to be surrounded with other people that are pleasing to the eye, so to speak. And so often we can find the best friends and the most loyal people out of some that are rejected by others. But anyway, so they were to be educated for 3 years, and then they would be brought to the king's court. And the book of Daniel talks about 4 of these young men, and their Israelite names were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they were all from, it says, the tribe of Judah. But the palace master renamed them. Daniel was Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. And so, we're familiar with these names: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And although they don't just flow off of our tongues, especially Abednego. I always wanted to say Abednego, but it's Abednego, but anyway, so they were to be fed this palace meal, and Daniel wasn't wanting to eat that, and the chief cook, this chief steward, the one who was watching over and training these young men, didn't like it that Daniel said, I don't want to eat that, let me eat this. And Daniel said, well, I'll tell you what, give us a 10-day trial. And if we don't look as good as the others at the end of 10 days, well, then we'll switch and we'll eat that. But through this, it says they were fed vegetables and stuff that way, but God saw fit to make sure that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego flourished. They grew, and in the end of 10 days, they looked even better than the others. And so the chief steward, it says the palace master, allowed them to have this change the diet, although he didn't tell the king. It doesn't really, but it was, he allowed their meal to be changed, and it went on that way. And so then at the end of this time, is what verse 18 says, so at the end of the 3 years, when they had been being trained and everything, they were brought in to serve in the palace. And it says the king spoke with them, and they found no one to compare with these four men. They were the wisest, the strongest, the most handsome, the best able, most versed in, whatever. They were the cream of the crop, so to speak. It says, in every manner of wisdom and understanding concerning the king, which the king acquired, he found them to be 10 times better than the magicians and the enchanters of his whole kingdom. And then this chapter ends, chapter 1 ends with, and Daniel continued there until the first year of King Cyrus. So, it was, they were there for quite some time until King Cyrus. And then chapter 2 deals with the king's dream, and the first dream that we see anyway. And so the king had a dream, and he calls his wise men, and he calls the magicians, and he calls everybody to tell him what his dream is, and then the interpretation of the dream. And they say, but well, how can we tell you the interpretation if you don't tell us the dream? And the king is smart enough to realize that, if he tells them the dream, they're going to confer and they're going to come up with some story in that. And he says that. He says, well, you will confer and you will lie to me about something. You will come up with something. You won't have positive and conclusive evidence of what this dream means. I won't be able to trust it 100% if you can't tell me both the dream and the interpretation. Then the king would know that, these magicians, these whatever you want to call them, the wise men of the kingdom were indeed wise men and had much knowledge and ability. And, they said, there's no one on earth that can do that. Verse 10, there is no one on earth who can reveal what the king demands. In fact, no king, no matter how powerful, has ever asked of such a thing. The thing this king is asking is too difficult, and no one can reveal it to the king except the gods. But they're forgetting that their gods, the idols, Baal, and all of these others, all they are statues. There's no wisdom, there's no understanding, there's nothing to them. So even these gods are unable, and the priests of these gods, of the temple of these gods, are unable to do anything. And the king, it says verse 12, because of this, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all of the wise men in Babylon would be destroyed. And as they were about to carried out this execution, Daniel responds, it says, with prudence and discretion. He comes to this the king's chief executioner, privately, and says, what's going on? What's happening here? So he isn't privy to what's happening, evidently. And so Daniel says, he asks, why is it so urgent? And then Daniel went and requested the king to give him a little bit of time. And then Daniel, it says, verse 17, went home, informed his companions. So these four men together, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we know them mostly, seek the mercy of God, seek mercy from the God of heaven, it says, concerning this mystery. And Daniel has a vision from God. God gives him the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he gives him the interpretation of it. And in verse 20, we have this wonderful prayer from Daniel praising and thanking God. Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. And Daniel said, this isn't me. This isn't me doing this. This is the God of the Israelites. This is my God who has revealed this to me. And then he goes then to this Arioch, the chief executioner, and he says, don't destroy him. I will go and I will tell the king his interpretation. So this Arioch goes and tells the king, I found among the Hebrews, the exiles from Judah, a man who can tell. And Daniel comes to him and he says to the king, no man can tell you this. But in verse 28, I love this verse. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has chosen to disclose to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen. There's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And that is such an important thing for us to know and remember, that there's a God in heaven. And he may not reveal and open all the mysteries to us. He may not give us all of the wisdom of everything that's going to happen. But to know that there is a God in heaven and to acknowledge that God in heaven is what's important. And so then Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar of what his dream was, and of the, this statue, the head, and the fine, and all of that. And then he tells him the interpretation of the dream. And in verse 46, we're getting to the end of chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, worshipped Daniel, and commands that a grain offering and incense be offered to him. And he says to Daniel, truly, your God is a God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of the mysteries, for you have been able to do this. And the king promoted Daniel, it says, and gave him many great gifts. And Daniel made a request to the king and appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to go over the affairs. And Daniel remained in the king's court. So this is the first of the stories, the first of the dreams that we encounter in the book of Daniel. And tomorrow we read 3 and 4, and then we read 5, 6, 7, and then 8, 9, 10. And, so we just continue. And Daniel is one of the books that, I enjoy reading Daniel because of the way God chooses to reveal himself, and God chooses to work in the world. And to know and to trust and to believe that God works in the world yet today.